Sometimes the cruelest thing a family can do is make you feel invisible while smiling directly at your face. I realized that the moment I stepped into my son's new house and saw an entire wall dedicated to memories that no longer included me. The driveway was already full when I arrived that Saturday afternoon. Luxury SUVs lined both sides of the quiet suburban street outside Daniel's new home in Naperville, Illinois. The kind of neighborhood with trimmed hedges, oversized windows, and freshly planted maple trees that all looked expensive even before you stepped inside. I sat in my car for a moment longer than necessary, smoothing my hands over the navy blue dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. Daniel used to tell me blue made my eyes look younger, back when he still noticed things like that. I picked up the lemon cheesecake from the passenger seat and walked carefully toward the front door while laughter spilled from inside the house. Vanessa opened the door before I could knock. Her cream-colored sweater matched the marble entryway behind her so perfectly she almost looked staged there, like part of the decor. "Eleanor," she said with a polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You made it. Not 'we're so glad you're here.' Not even Mom. Just Eleanor." I handed her the cheesecake. I remembered Daniel still likes lemon. "Oh," she said lightly, already turning away toward the kitchen. "We actually ordered desserts from that French bakery downtown, but I'm sure someone will eat it." I stood there awkwardly for half a second before stepping inside. The house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh paint. Guests moved through the rooms holding wine glasses while soft jazz played through hidden speakers in the ceiling. Everything looked carefully curated. Perfect. Untouched. Vanessa had always been good at creating beautiful surfaces. "Mom!" Daniel finally appeared from the dining room, wearing a fitted gray sweater that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. He hugged me quickly with one arm while glancing over my shoulder toward another guest arriving behind me. "Glad you found the place okay." "Of course," I said quietly. "I wouldn't miss this." But he was already distracted again, shaking hands with a man in a sports coat near the staircase. I watched him laugh at something the man said, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to run into my kitchen after Little League practice asking if I'd made grilled cheese sandwiches. That boy used to look for me in every room. This man barely noticed I was standing there. I wandered slowly through the house, pretending to admire everything while trying not to feel like an outsider at my own son's celebration. Then I saw the wall. It stretched across the far side of the living room beside the fireplace. Floor-to-ceiling framed photographs arranged with almost surgical precision. Daniel and Vanessa smiling on a beach in Maui. Daniel proposing beside a snowy lake. Their wedding day. Christmas mornings in matching pajamas. Weekend winery trips. Ultrasound photos pinned beside a gold script sign that read our story. Guests stood nearby admiring it. "Vanessa designed the whole thing herself," one woman said warmly. "It's like walking through their entire journey together." I stared at the photographs while something cold slowly spread through my chest. There were dozens of pictures on that wall. Birthdays, vacations, holidays, milestones. But not a single one included me. Not one photo of Daniel as a child. Not one Thanksgiving at my dining table. Not one graduation picture from the years I worked double shifts to put him through college. It was as if his life had only begun the moment Vanessa entered it. I looked closer, almost hoping I'd missed something. But I hadn't. Every memory connected to me had been quietly erased. And suddenly the room full of people felt unbearably loud while I stood there smiling politely, realizing my son's new life had been carefully designed without leaving any trace of the woman who gave him his first one. I kept staring at that wall long after it became inappropriate to do so. Around me, guests laughed over glasses of Pinot Noir while Vanessa floated gracefully from room to room, touching elbows, complimenting shoes, remembering everyone's names with effortless charm. She moved through that house like someone who had rehearsed every moment in advance. Even the music seemed timed to her movements. I stepped closer to the photographs, pretending to admire the frames. Daniel at 28 standing beside a ski lodge in Colorado. Daniel holding champagne on a rooftop in Manhattan. Daniel smiling in front of their first apartment downtown. Every image told the same story. A polished couple building a beautiful life together from nothing. It was not just that I was missing. It was that his entire past had been cleaned away. Beautiful, right? Vanessa suddenly appeared beside me holding two champagne flutes. She handed one to me before I could refuse. I wanted the wall to feel intentional, minimal, elegant. I nodded slowly. It certainly tells a story. She smiled proudly, misunderstanding my meaning entirely. Exactly. Her manicured hand gestured toward the photographs. People love seeing the journey. Journey. The word settled heavily in my chest, because I remembered another journey entirely. I remembered sitting at a laundromat at 11 o'clock at night folding scrubs after my nursing shift while Daniel slept across two plastic chairs beside me wrapped in my winter coat. I remembered clipping coupons at the kitchen table after my divorce because I needed enough money for his asthma medication and school supplies in the same week. I remembered the tiny apartment with water stains on the ceiling where I promised my 8-year-old son that one day we would live somewhere better. None of those memories had made it onto Vanessa's wall. "You must be so proud," a woman beside me said warmly. She looked to be around my age with silver hair tucked neatly behind one ear. Daniel and Vanessa really built something special. I smiled politely because I had spent most of my adult life learning how to smile through disappointment. "Yes," I said softly. "They certainly did." Before I could say anything else, Vanessa lightly touched my arm. "Eleanor, would you mind moving a little? People are trying to take pictures near the fireplace." Her tone was sweet enough that nobody else would notice the dismissal hidden underneath it. But I noticed. I stepped aside immediately. Of course. Daniel walked into the room, then carrying a tray of drinks while two men followed him discussing mortgage rates and investment properties. He looked confident, successful, older somehow. There was a sharpness to him now that had not existed before Vanessa. "Babe," Vanessa called brightly. "Tell Michael how hard you worked to make all this happen." Daniel laughed modestly while setting the tray down. "It was definitely not overnight. You should hear where he started," Vanessa added with a soft laugh. "Tiny apartment. Student loans. Nothing glamorous." The guests chuckled sympathetically. I stood completely still. Tiny apartment. She said it like a funny little footnote. Like those years existed only to make the success story more inspiring. She did not mention the woman who worked 16-hour shifts to keep the lights on inside that apartment. She did not mention the mother who skipped meals so her son could attend a summer science program in Michigan when he was 15. She did not mention the old Honda Civic with 200,000 miles that carried him to every scholarship interview across 3 states. Daniel smiled at the guests without correcting her. That hurt more than anything else. Because silence can become its own kind of agreement after long enough. I took a sip of champagne even though my throat suddenly felt too tight to swallow. Across the room, laughter rose again while the fireplace glowed softly beneath the wall of carefully edited memories. And for the first time in my life, I realized there are people who do not remove you from their lives all at once. They do it slowly, quietly, one missing photograph at a time. I moved away from the fireplace after that, carrying my untouched champagne through the house like someone wandering through a museum where every exhibit belonged to another family. The kitchen island overflowed with catered food arranged on white ceramic platters. Tiny crab cakes, bacon-wrapped dates, mini cheesecakes topped with raspberries. Vanessa had always loved presentations that looked expensive enough to photograph. A younger woman near the sink smiled politely at me. "Are you from Daniel's side or Vanessa's?" she asked. Such a small question. So ordinary. But something about the way she asked it made my stomach tighten. Like she genuinely could not place me inside their lives. "I am Daniel's mother," I answered gently. Her face changed instantly. "Oh my goodness. I am so sorry. Vanessa talks about her parents all the time. I guess I just assumed." She stopped herself awkwardly. "No need to apologize," I said with a smile that felt strangely heavy on my face. "It happens. But it should not have happened. Not to a mother." I excused myself quietly and stepped into the hallway leading toward the back of the house. The noise from the party softened there, replaced by the low hum of central air and the faint scent of fresh paint. Family photographs lined another wall farther down. Smaller frames this time, carefully spaced. Vanessa with her parents at a vineyard. Vanessa and Daniel holding champagne glasses in Napa Valley. Vanessa's family gathered around a long Thanksgiving table, wearing matching cream sweaters. I stopped walking. There was not a single photograph from my side of the family anywhere in that house. Not my late parents. Not Daniel as a child at the county fair. Not the old lake cabin my brother used to rent every summer when Daniel was small. Nothing before Vanessa existed here anymore. I suddenly remembered Christmas 2 years earlier when Daniel canceled dinner at my house 3 hours before everyone was supposed to arrive. Vanessa had called sounding exhausted. "We are just trying to simplify the holidays this year," she had explained softly. Later that night I saw photographs online of a massive Christmas party at her parents' home. Caterers, matching pajamas, 40 people gathered around a fireplace larger than my bedroom. Daniel smiling in every picture. Another memory surfaced behind it. Daniel's 35th birthday. I had mailed him an old childhood photograph of the two of us standing outside Wrigley Field after his first Cubs game. He never mentioned receiving it. A month later, Vanessa posted a birthday tribute online with the caption, "Watching you become the man you are today has been the greatest adventure of my life." The slideshow included dozens of polished photos from their years together. Nothing before her. At the time I convinced myself I was being overly sensitive. Older women are taught to do that. To minimize our pain so nobody accuses us of making things about ourselves. I continued slowly down the hallway until I reached Daniel's home office. The door stood partially open. Inside, dark wooden shelves displayed awards, framed business articles, and leather-bound books arranged by color. A large black and white photograph hung behind the desk showing Daniel shaking hands with a state senator at some corporate event downtown. The brass plaque beneath it read Self-Made Leadership Summit. I stared at those words for a very long time. Self-made. As though nobody had stayed awake beside hospital beds during childhood fevers. As though nobody had driven 600 miles round trip to help him move into college with a borrowed pickup truck and $47 left in a checking account afterward. I touched the edge of the doorway lightly before stepping back into the hall. Somewhere behind me, guests burst into laughter again while glasses clinked softly in celebration. But standing there inside my son's beautiful new house, I began realizing something painful. Vanessa had not erased me all at once. She had done it gradually, carefully over years. Like someone removing old wallpaper one quiet strip at a time until no trace of the original room remained. I was about to return to the kitchen when I heard soft footsteps behind me. "Eleanor," a gentle voice called. I turned and found a woman standing near the hallway entrance holding a half-empty wine glass. She looked familiar immediately. Tall, silver-blonde hair styled neatly above pearl earrings, the same sharp cheekbones Vanessa had inherited. Margaret Hale, Vanessa's mother. We had met several times over the years at weddings, birthdays, and holiday dinners, though never long enough to know each other well. "I thought that was you," she said warmly, walking closer. "You look lovely tonight." "Thank you," I replied politely. "So do you." For a brief moment, neither of us said anything. The music from the living room drifted softly into the hallway, while voices blended together in the distance. Margaret glanced toward the office behind me before lowering her voice slightly. "Quite a house, is it not?" "It is beautiful," I admitted. She nodded slowly, though her expression carried something heavier than pride. Vanessa always wanted a life that looked impressive. There was something unusual in the way she said it. Not admiration exactly. More like exhaustion. I offered a small smile. "She certainly has an eye for detail." Margaret gave a quiet laugh under her breath. "That is one way to put it." Her eyes moved briefly toward the family photographs down the hall before settling back on me again. "I hope you know this evening is probably harder for you than anyone realizes." I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the stem of my champagne glass. Most people at that party looked directly at me without truly seeing me at all. But Margaret saw enough to make me uncomfortable. "I am fine," I answered automatically. She tilted her head gently. "No, you are being gracious. That is different." The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. Margaret stepped beside me near the office doorway, lowering her voice further. "Vanessa has always been very particular about appearances. Even as a little girl." I remained quiet. "She does not like anything that complicates the image she wants people to see," Margaret continued carefully. "And Daniel fits very neatly into the life she imagined for herself." Something cold moved through my chest again. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" I asked softly. Margaret hesitated long enough that I could tell she was choosing her words with care. I think Vanessa likes stories that begin with success. She does not care much for reminders of struggle. I looked down the hallway toward the photographs once more. Suddenly the missing pieces made terrible sense. The old apartment. My nursing uniforms. The years Daniel and I spent barely getting by after his father left. None of it matched the elegant version of life Vanessa preferred displaying to the world. She thinks those years make Daniel look ordinary, Margaret admitted quietly. And Vanessa hates ordinary. I stared at her in silence, because hearing it spoken aloud somehow hurt more than realizing it alone. Margaret sighed softly before continuing. I do not think Daniel fully understands what she has been doing over time. Or perhaps he understands more than he admits to himself. I honestly do not know anymore. Somewhere in the living room, Vanessa's laughter rose brightly above the others. Smooth. Controlled. Perfect. Margaret looked toward the sound with tired eyes. I raised her, she said quietly. So I know exactly how skilled she can be at removing inconvenient things from view. Inconvenient things. I suddenly realized that was what I had become inside my son's new life. Not hated. Not openly rejected. Just inconvenient. Too connected to the years before expensive wine and curated photographs and leadership conferences. Too connected to sacrifice. To struggle. To reality. Margaret touched my arm gently before stepping away. For what it is worth, she said softly, I do not believe a person can erase where they came from forever. Eventually the truth starts showing through the cracks. Then she walked back toward the party, disappearing once again into the warm golden light of the living room, while I remained alone in the hallway holding a glass of champagne I no longer wanted, slowly realizing that some people do not just redecorate houses after success. They redecorate memories too. I stayed in the hallway for another minute after Margaret walked away, trying to steady the strange heaviness building inside my chest. The party carried on without interruption around me. Laughter. Music. Ice clinking against crystal glasses. The kind of evening people would later describe as perfect. I finally placed my untouched champagne on a side table and continued farther down the hall, mostly because I needed air and partly because I no longer trusted myself to stand near that memory wall pretending everything felt normal. At the very end of the hallway, past the guest bathroom and laundry room, I noticed a narrow door slightly open beneath the staircase. Soft yellow light spilled through the crack. Storage probably. I almost kept walking, but something stopped me. Maybe instinct. Maybe grief. Maybe the quiet desperation of a mother searching for proof that she had once mattered inside her own son's life. I pushed the door open gently. The room smelled faintly of cardboard and cedarwood. Stacked plastic bins lined the walls beside unopened moving boxes labeled kitchen, holiday decor, and office files. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then I noticed a familiar red ribbon hanging from one of the boxes near the back. My stomach tightened instantly. I walked closer slowly, kneeling beside the container before carefully lifting the lid. Inside sat an entire lifetime that had quietly disappeared from upstairs. Old framed photographs wrapped in newspaper. Handmade Mother's Day cards in Daniel's uneven childhood handwriting. Christmas ornaments covered in fading glitter. A cracked ceramic mug he made for me in second grade that still read World's Best Mom, even though the handle had broken years ago. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up a photograph buried near the bottom. Daniel at age 10 standing beside me outside our first apartment after I finally saved enough money for a used car. We were both smiling so hard our faces looked almost distorted by happiness. Another photograph showed his high school graduation. Me in wrinkled scrubs because I had come directly from a 12-hour hospital shift. Daniel had his arm around my shoulders in that picture. Proud. Unashamed. I swallowed hard. Every trace of our real life together had been packed away downstairs like seasonal decorations no longer matching the new house. I sat there staring at those boxes while memories came rushing back with painful clarity. Daniel crying at the kitchen table over algebra homework, while I reheated canned soup after night shift. Daniel asleep on my shoulder during long bus rides into the city because I could not afford daycare during summers. Daniel hugging me tightly after receiving his college acceptance letter, whispering, "We did it, Mom." We. Back then he used to say we. Upstairs, footsteps crossed the hardwood floor above me while laughter echoed faintly through the ceiling. Their beautiful guests had no idea that an Entire discarded history sat hidden beneath the stairs like something embarrassing people hoped visitors would never discover. I reached deeper into the box and found a folded paper tucked beneath one of the albums. It was part of Vanessa's handwriting. Clean. Slanted. Deliberate. Keep downstairs. Does not fit aesthetic upstairs. I stared at the sentence for a long time. Not angry at first. Just hollow. Because there it was at last. Not misunderstanding. Not oversensitivity. Not imagination. Proof. Every missing photograph upstairs had been a decision. Every erased memory had been intentional. I carefully placed the paper back exactly where I found it. Then I closed the lid slowly and rested my hand on top of the box for a brief moment. Somewhere between opening that container and reading Vanessa's note, something inside me changed quietly. The sadness was still there. But beneath it, another feeling had started forming. Clarity. Cold. Sharp. Steady clarity. Because it is one thing to realize someone no longer values you. It is another thing entirely to discover they carefully packed away evidence that you were ever loved at all. I closed the storage room door carefully behind me and stood there for a moment with my hand still resting against the knob. My reflection stared back faintly from a decorative mirror across the hallway. For the first time that evening, I looked older to myself. Not weaker. Just tired in a way sleep could never fix. Upstairs, the party continued as though nothing important had happened. Maybe that was the strangest part of all. The world rarely pauses for quiet heartbreaks. I walked slowly back toward the living room, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my dress before stepping once again into the warm golden light of the house. Vanessa stood near the dining table laughing beside a group of guests while Daniel opened another bottle of wine. He looked relaxed, comfortable, entirely at home inside the version of his life displayed on those walls. I watched him for several seconds from across the room, and somewhere between the storage boxes downstairs and the smile on his face upstairs, another painful realization settled over me. Daniel knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not every photograph Vanessa packed away or every decision she made. But he knew enough. Because nobody accidentally removes their mother from every meaningful corner of their life. Not this completely. Not over years. Silence requires participation eventually. Mom, there you are, Daniel said suddenly, noticing me near the hallway entrance. He walked over carrying 2 glasses of red wine and handed one to me automatically. Vanessa was worried you disappeared. Worried. The word almost made me smile. I was just looking around, I answered calmly. The house is very impressive. Thanks, he said proudly, glancing around the room. It took a lot of work to get here. I looked at him carefully then. Really looked at him. The expensive watch. The tailored sweater. The polished confidence. He had spent so many years climbing upward that perhaps he no longer knew what to do with the people still connected to the ground beneath him. Do you remember our apartment on Ashland Avenue? I asked quietly. Daniel blinked slightly, caught off guard by the question. What? The one above the bakery. The radiator barely worked during winter. He gave a short laugh. Yeah, that place was terrible. Terrible. I remembered it differently. Small, yes. Exhausting sometimes. But also full of burnt pancakes on Saturday mornings and old movies during thunderstorms and late-night conversations at the kitchen table, while homework papers covered every surface. It was not terrible to me. It was our beginning. I found some old photographs downstairs, I said carefully, watching his expression. For one brief second, something flickered across his face. Not surprise. Recognition. Then it vanished just as quickly. Oh, he replied lightly, taking a sip of wine. Vanessa is still organizing everything. Organizing. Such a harmless word for something that suddenly felt so cruel. I held his gaze quietly. Those photographs used to mean a lot to you. Daniel shifted uncomfortably before lowering his voice slightly. Mom, do not do this tonight. There it was. Not confusion. Not denial. A request for convenience. My chest tightened, though my voice remained. Calm. Do what? Make things emotional. He glanced toward the guests nearby as though worried someone might overhear. Vanessa worked really hard on tonight. I stared at him in silence. Because after everything I had discovered downstairs, that sentence revealed more than he realized. He was protecting the atmosphere. The image. The carefully edited version of their life together. Not me. Never me. I see, I said softly. Daniel sighed, already looking exhausted by a conversation that had barely begun. Mom, people change. Lives move forward. It does not mean anyone is trying to hurt you. The sadness that settled inside me then felt strangely clean. Not chaotic. Not angry. Just final somehow. Because at last I understood the truth I had avoided for years. Vanessa may have started erasing me quietly, but Daniel had allowed the empty spaces to remain. I looked around the beautiful room one more time. The glowing fireplace. The polished guests. The memory wall upstairs filled with edited happiness. And standing beside my son with a glass of untouched wine in my hand, I realized something heartbreaking. Some people do not betray you loudly. They betray you gently, carefully, in ways that allow them to still think of themselves as good people afterward. I did not argue with Daniel after that. There was no point. Some conversations end long before the words stop, and standing there beside the dining table, I could already feel the distance between us settling into something permanent. Daniel was pulled away moments later by another guest, asking about investment properties near downtown Chicago. Vanessa joined him instantly, resting her hand lightly against his arm while smiling at everyone around them with practiced warmth. Together they looked flawless, like the kind of couple people secretly envy at dinner parties. I stood alone near the kitchen for a while watching strangers admire my son's success as though it had appeared from nowhere. Then Vanessa tapped a spoon gently against her wine glass. Everyone, she announced brightly. Before dessert, Daniel wants to say a few words. The room quieted immediately. Guests gathered near the fireplace while Daniel stepped forward with easy confidence. Vanessa stood beside him looking up proudly, her hand still resting against his arm like she was presenting something she had personally built herself. Daniel smiled at the crowd. First of all, thank you all for coming tonight. Honestly, standing here feels surreal sometimes. A few people laughed softly. There were definitely years when I never imagined any of this would happen. He gestured lightly around the room. But Vanessa and I worked incredibly hard for this life. Every late night. Every sacrifice. Every setback. I felt my chest tighten slowly. Not because what he said was entirely false. They had worked hard. But truth becomes dangerous when pieces of it start disappearing. People see the finished product, Daniel continued, but they do not always understand what it takes to build something from the ground up. Vanessa squeezed his arm affectionately while guests nodded admiringly. Then came the sentence that hollowed something out inside me completely. At the end of the day, Daniel said proudly, everything in this house represents two people who built their future entirely on their own. Applause filled the room immediately afterward. Warm, enthusiastic, sincere. I stood perfectly still near the kitchen island while the sound washed over me like cold rain. Entirely on their own. Upstairs, my son's childhood photographs had vanished from the walls. Downstairs, the evidence of our real life together sat hidden inside storage bins beneath the staircase. And now, standing in front of everyone who mattered to them, Daniel had finally erased me out loud. Not cruelly. Not angrily. Worse. Casually. Like it no longer even occurred to him that I belonged inside his story at all. Vanessa looked radiant beside him, accepting compliments and hugs while guests praised their determination. Self-made couple, one man said admiringly. That is rare these days. Vanessa smiled modestly. We have definitely had to rely on each other. I lowered my eyes before anyone could see the hurt on my face, because suddenly I understood the real reason those photographs had been hidden downstairs. Not embarrassment. Not redecorating. Those memories contradicted the story they wanted to sell. The struggling single mother. The old apartment. The years of sacrifice. None of it fit the polished mythology they had created together. I quietly walked back toward the hallway before anyone noticed I was gone again. The storage room remained exactly as I left it. Silent. Hidden. Forgotten. I knelt beside the same plastic container once more and carefully lifted out the old leather photo album resting near the bottom. The cover was worn soft with age. Daniel had given it to me on my 50th birthday after spending months filling it with handwritten captions beneath every photograph. Best pancakes ever. Mom working night shift but still coming to my game. Our first Christmas after the divorce. I traced my fingers lightly across the faded leather, while something inside me settled into calm certainty. Not rage. Not revenge. Just truth. Upstairs, guests continued celebrating the carefully edited version of my son's life. But downstairs in my hands rested the version that had actually happened. And for the first time all evening, I realized I did not need to argue with Daniel or expose Vanessa publicly to make them uncomfortable. Sometimes all a person has to do is place the truth back into the room and let silence do the rest. I carried the leather photo album upstairs slowly, one hand resting beneath it like something fragile and sacred. Nobody paid attention to me at first. The party had loosened into that comfortable stage where conversations overlapped and guests laughed a little louder after enough wine. Vanessa stood near the dining table arranging dessert plates while Daniel discussed stock markets with two men by the fireplace. Everything still looked polished, controlled, beautiful. I walked quietly toward the large coffee table in the center of the living room and placed the album there without saying a word. Then I stepped back. That was all. No speech, no confrontation, no dramatic scene. Just the truth sitting silently in the middle of their carefully constructed version of reality. For several minutes nobody noticed it. Guests continued moving around the room while soft jazz floated through hidden speakers overhead. Then an older man wearing reading glasses wandered toward the coffee table holding a bourbon in one hand. "Now this looks interesting," he said casually before opening the album. I watched from across the room as his expression shifted page by page. The first photograph showed 6-year-old Daniel asleep in my lap, inside a Greyhound bus station after we missed our connection during a snowstorm in Indiana. The next page showed me wearing pale blue hospital scrubs beside Daniel at his middle school science fair. Another photograph captured our tiny apartment kitchen with birthday decorations taped crookedly to the cabinets because I could not afford anything more elaborate that year. Handwritten captions filled the margins in Daniel's own teenage handwriting. Mom never missed a game even after double shifts. Best Thanksgiving ever even though we burned the turkey. She always made things work somehow. The man glanced around the room uncertainly before calling softly to his wife. "Linda, come look at this." Within minutes, more guests gathered near the table. Quiet curiosity replaced casual conversation. I saw people turning pages slowly, their expressions growing more thoughtful each time. Someone paused at a photograph of 16-year-old Daniel standing proudly beside my old Honda Civic after we finally saved enough money to replace the broken transmission. Another guest lingered over a page filled with college acceptance letters spread across our kitchen table, while I cried into my hands beside him. Upstairs on the memory wall, Daniel's life began the moment success looked attractive enough to frame. But inside that album, people could suddenly see the years before polish, before image. Before Vanessa started editing the story, I noticed Daniel across the room then. His smile faded the moment he recognized the album. He stood completely still for a second before slowly walking toward the coffee table. Vanessa saw it almost immediately afterward. Her entire body tightened even before she reached the crowd. "Oh," she said lightly, though her voice sounded strained now. "I was wondering where that old thing disappeared to." "Old thing?" One of the women near the table looked up at her gently. "These photographs are beautiful." Vanessa forced a smile. "Yes, well, we have been trying to declutter during the move." Declutter. The word hung awkwardly in the air, because by then the room had already changed. The guests were no longer admiring curated luxury or listening to stories about self-made success. They were seeing evidence of sacrifice, exhaustion, real love. Margaret stood near the hallway entrance watching everything unfold silently. Our eyes met briefly across the room. She did not smile, but she gave the slightest nod, almost imperceptible. Daniel reached the coffee table at last and stared down at the open album. The page displayed a photograph of him at 12 years old standing beside me outside Wrigley Field, both of us wrapped in oversized winter coats while snow covered the sidewalks behind us. Beneath the picture, his younger handwriting read, "Mom saved for 8 months to bring me here. Best day of my life." The room had gone strangely quiet around us by then. Not hostile, not dramatic, just uncomfortable in the honest way truth often becomes once people finally see it clearly. I adjusted the strap of my purse gently on my shoulder before looking at Daniel one last time. Then I spoke the only words I had left for either of them that evening. "Enjoy your party." And with that, I turned calmly toward the front door while behind me the silence inside that beautiful house grew heavier than any argument ever could. The air outside felt colder than it had earlier that evening. A sharp November wind moved through the quiet subdivision as I stepped off Daniel's front porch and wrapped my coat tighter around myself. Behind me, the house still glowed warmly through enormous windows while silhouettes drifted slowly from room to room. From the outside, it still looked perfect. Beautiful homes usually do. I stood beside my car for a moment without getting in. My hands rested lightly against the roof while I stared back at the place my son had worked so hard to build. Strange how quickly a house can stop feeling welcoming once you realize you were never meant to belong inside it in the first place. My phone buzzed before I even backed out of the driveway. "Daniel." I watched his name appear across the screen until the call disappeared unanswered. Then another call came less than 2 minutes later, followed by a text. "Mom, please do not leave upset." Another message appeared moments later. Vanessa did not mean anything by the boxes downstairs. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because some people become so committed to preserving comfort that they convince themselves intention matters more than impact. I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home through quiet suburban streets lined with bare trees and glowing porch lights. By the time I reached my townhouse, 3 more missed calls waited on my screen. I did not listen to the voicemails. Instead, I changed into my oldest sweater, made chamomile tea, and sat alone at the kitchen table long after midnight. The leather photo album rested beside me under the soft yellow light above the stove. I turned the pages slowly one more time. Daniel in Little League. Daniel asleep beside textbooks during finals week in college. Daniel hugging me after receiving his first job offer in downtown Chicago. Every page carried evidence of a life that existed long before expensive wine and marble countertops and curated memory walls. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I realized something surprising. I was no longer angry. Hurt, yes. Deeply. But the anger had already started fading into something quieter. Acceptance, perhaps. Because once the truth becomes visible, exhausting yourself begging people to acknowledge it no longer feels necessary. Over the next few weeks, Daniel continued calling. Sometimes twice a day. His messages grew increasingly uncertain. "Mom, I think we should talk." "Mom, things got misunderstood." "Mom, you embarrassed Vanessa in front of everyone." That last message sat with me the longest. Not because it hurt, because of what it revealed. Even after everything, he still viewed the uncomfortable silence at the party as the real problem, not the years of careful erasure that caused it. Vanessa never contacted me directly, but Margaret did. A handwritten card arrived 3 weeks later tucked inside a plain white envelope. "You deserved better than what happened in that house. Some truths take longer for people to face than others." I placed the card inside the same album beside Daniel's old photographs. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the sidewalks outside my townhouse while Christmas lights appeared quietly across neighboring windows. Daniel invited me to dinner twice during December. I declined both times politely. Not to punish him. Not to create drama. I simply no longer had the energy to force myself into spaces where my presence felt conditional. One evening shortly before Christmas, I carried the leather album to the bookshelf in my living room and slid it carefully into place beside my favorite novels. Then I stood there looking at it for a long moment. Upstairs in Daniel's house, my photographs may still be hidden inside storage boxes beneath the stairs. Maybe they always will be. But strangely enough, that no longer felt like my tragedy to carry. Because the moment I stopped begging for a place inside the version of the story they created, I finally understood something important. They had only erased me from their walls. They could never erase the life I survived to build.